Welcome to Torah Smash, the podcast for nerdy Jews, where our lives of Jewish learning collide with our love of nerd culture. In each episode, we discuss what we lovingly call a Torah Smash, which we have defined as a beautiful collision of one thing from the world of Judaism with another from nerd culture. I am Barak Malkin, and joining me today are...
Ethan Lane Miller.
RDY.
And Melissa Raub.
Yay!
Melissa's here.
Our guest for today's episode is Melissa Raub. Melissa is from the bustling city of Dunder Mifflin, aka Scranton, Pennsylvania. She moved to Philadelphia to pursue her degree in theater and voice and speech. Melissa got her master's from Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 2017 and moved to Los Angeles shortly after. She has worked at multiple synagogues and organizations in LA before finally forming her own company in 2023, M3, Mitzvahs, Mazzles, and Memories. She now has over 30 students that she sees on a weekly basis in LA and all over the country. Her main focus is working with B-Mitzvah students who do not belong to a temple and want to find a connection to Judaism. She loves a good young adult novel and learning more about gluten-free baking and cooking. When she's not doing any of those things, she's geeking out over voice and speech and works as a voice actor. You can currently hear her voice on over 500 real estate spots on Homes.com, Spotify commercials, YouTube ads, and animations. Melissa met our co-host Ethan 10 years ago while working together in a synagogue in New Jersey. Her claim to fame is being introduced to an insanely complicated game and then promptly beating Ethan at it. Also, she says that she can confirm that out of all of us, Ethan is in fact the Muppet. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm so happy that you confirmed it.
Want to clear up any
was
suspicion.
it? What game was it?
I couldn't think of the name of it. It's where you had all the different tiles and different shapes and different colors, and you had to
Oracle.
match.
It's not a complicated game.
Oracle.
Oracle's
Okay.
great. Also not complicated.
But you were like, I don't know if you're gonna get it the first time, and then I beat you. So
I definitely was not that condescending.
We'll roll the tape later. So
Yeah.
You know what's interesting is that she confirmed that Ethan's the Muppet, but for our listeners who don't know, Ethan and RDY are sitting in the same house for this recording next to each other, just as you would if one of you was a Muppet and the other was the Muppeteer. And so it's hard to know which of them is the Muppet in this situation, but I'm going to give Melissa the benefit of the doubt.
Why do we always come here?
So there was a great visual gag at the start of this where RDY logged on, had a virtual background, was talking to Barak. I was like, I need to go run for a second. So RDY leaves and I come back and sit down. And I wish I could taken a picture of Barak's face. It was a mix of like amusement, jealousy, and a lot of annoyed. He was so annoyed. He was so annoyed.
yeah, it's the thing a Muppet would do.
Yeah.
Muppets annoy people.
Hi-yo!
That was Ethan.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's get to today's topic. So, Judaism is one of the world's most dominant religions, based on the monotheistic belief in a single God. Within American Judaism, there are multiple denominations, sometimes referred to as movements or branches, that most Jews choose to be affiliated with. Although in recent years, it does seem like there is a growing number of American Jews who identify not with a certain sect of Judaism, but as said as just Jewish. But what concept from nerd culture do you think mirrors this differentiation between the different denominations of Judaism?
Okay, I know it's not this, but the season finale, The Acolyte, airs tomorrow. So I'm going to say it's the different branches of Force users in the Star Wars universe.
Oh, see, I was on that same vibe, but I was thinking Star Trek or Wars.
Oh, more meta.
I was thinking like DC versus Marvel, like the comic book universe is different.
Very
branches.
fascinating. You guys are all a little too deep in the weeds. Pull back, pull back to just nerd culture overall.
So like comic books versus movies versus board games versus blah, blah, blah.
Video games.
No, not quite. I'll give you guys like one more guess. Who wants to take one more guess?
Like Dungeons and Dragons, like that world.
No, you're still very specific in like a niche. Get out of the niches.
I'd say Judaism's pretty niche, so maybe that's why we're thinking. So.
Is this the like nerd versus geek versus dweeb kind of thing?
Yeah,
Oh,
today.
man.
Very nice.
Good.
Right on the money. Today, we're going to be exploring the differences and definitions of nerds, geeks, dorks, dweebs, whatever other collections of what I will call the cool kids. So before we look at the cool kids tables, I think we have to start by breaking down the differences between the different movements in Judaism. There are three main branches in Judaism: Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform.
And Reconstructionist.
I said three main. There's
Reconstructionist is the main at this
there's
point.
Modern Orthodox, Haredi, Open Orthodox, like there's a lot of other ones.
Here's the way I would define a main versus and I know I'm not the lead host on this one, but I would say like a main is one that was like intentionally founded as something, with the exception of Orthodox for reasons that we'll get to hopefully in the middle of the podcast. Whereas like modern Orthodox is really like, we're still Orthodox, but, and same with like Chabad and Hasidut and all those, they're like still part of, but
sure.
You're saying recon is its own thing?
Yeah, it was founded.
I would
Kaplan.
agree. Kaplan, yeah.
Okay, sure, fine. Does anybody want to, for my friend Jason, who's not Jewish, may not know the differences? I think the point of this conversation stems from this misconception, I'll say, that Judaism is a spectrum of religious to not religious. And as a Reform Jew, that always bothers me.
Me too.
And so
the observant to less observant, as I think.
I don't think that flies either.
Yeah. So let's break these down. We can do those four if we want to do those four. Does anybody want to help us define any one of these movements?
I mean, this is a lesson plan I've taught many, many times, so I'm happy to break this down the way I see it. And if there are disagreements, I'm happy to show you why you're wrong. So in the mid 19th century, there was just Jewish or not Jewish. There weren't the divisions that we know today. And throughout the centuries, there have been other divisions that have just kind of gone away. But at the time, it was Jewish or not Jewish. And the way people who identified as Jewish practiced, we would call that Orthodox. In Germany, there was a group of Jews who decided that they wanted to pray in German so they could understand it. They wanted to wear the clothes that matched their neighbors' clothes. The men wanted to sit with their wives and children, and female friends and that kind of thing. They wanted to eat schnitzel with their neighbor. They wanted their buildings to look beautiful like the Protestant churches looked. So they had all this nationalist desire, which was also all the rage back then, to practice Judaism in a way that made them also look German. That group broke off from the Orthodox. And at that point, they started becoming known as Orthodox. Ortho means straight. So they are the straight way of practicing Judaism. And that split off group had more division about how much they want to speak German and how much they want to eat food that's not kosher and how much they want to, do all the things. And so that group broke off again. And the group that wanted to conserve the Jewish practices while maintaining their nationalist German lives became known as conservative Jews. And the group that wanted to totally reform Judaism to match modernity started calling themselves Reform Jews. And then when all the Jews started moving to America, as Jews do, they landed in New York and Cincinnati, the holy city. And people say, why Cincinnati? And there are two reasons. Number one, Cincinnati was very Germanic, so people were comfortable there. Number two, Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise got a job there, working for KK B'nai Jeshurun in the holy city of Cincinnati on Plum Street. And I know all the details of that one because I was confirmed there. I grew up there. I became bar mitzvah at Wise Center, so this is my home. And he really brought Reform Judaism to America, along with another Rabbi Wise, no relation, in New York. So one Rabbi Wise in Cincinnati creates HUC, the Hebrew Union College, where he starts training rabbis. The other Rabbi Wise creates the Jewish Institute of Religion, where he starts training rabbis in New York. Eventually they merged, became HUC-JIR, which everyone just calls HUC because Cincinnati is better. And
Shots fired.
And I mean, yeah.
And so those became the three base movements for a while. And then in California, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan in the 1920s, intentionally, he was ordained. I want to say he was ordained in the conservative movement, worked in the Orthodox movement, hated it, worked in the Reform movement, hated it, and decided that he needed to reconstruct Judaism. So the differences among the four movements are philosophical, not on level of practice, where I would say that I am just as observant as many a conservative or Reconstructionist Jew, but I define my observance differently. So in the Orthodox world, the main things that make us Jewish, monotheism, which we all agree on, and Torah, and how Torah is interpreted. So the Orthodox believe that Torah comes from God, therefore it is God's word, therefore everything in it should be used as if it came from God. The conservative movement believes that Torah needs to be interpreted by an expert, aka a rabbi, and therefore they go by the teachings of their rabbis, who go by the teachings of their rabbis, who go by the teachings of their rabbis. The Reconstructionist movement believes that halakha, Jewish law, is interpreted as a community. So they're very egalitarian today, just as much as the Reform movement, but back then, way ahead of its time, to the point where they reject chosenness. That's how egalitarian they are. And I kind of love that. The Reform movement believes in personal autonomy, that the interpretation of Torah law is up to the individual, but that is done through education. So educated choice, informed choices are the way Torah is interpreted in the Reform movement. Everybody been taking notes?
Great.
I'd agree with that. Also, fun fact, the first ever female American bat mitzvah was Mordechai Kaplan's daughter.
True.
So that was
in May 1922.
Yeah, he really wanted to push that, which is pretty cool.
I didn't know that.
As a woman.
Yeah.
So
she wrote about it in her bio of him, and the whole description takes a paragraph. It's yeah, I talked about the Haftarah, and then we went to a nice lunch. But she did it.
Yeah. I would also say, to add to your point, I think the different movements define who wrote the Torah, right? I think Orthodox are it came from God. Conservative was God gave it to us, but it's up to our rabbis to interpret it, which is what you said. And then I would agree that I think Reform and Reconstructionists both believe that it was written by humans and decide how we're going to interpret based on our lives and how we assimilate, because that was a big thing back then. So
absolutely. And that makes the conservative and Orthodox movements are known as halachic movements, where they follow Jewish law according to, and Reform and Reconstructive movements are known as non-halachic. And then sometimes those two words will be phrased as conservative and liberal, which gets confusing when you're talking conservative or little c, conservative, big C.
And I would say you could even split hairs even more. So I grew up East Coast conservative, which out here would probably be considered almost Orthodox. I had a kosher home, and my family, we didn't really keep Shabbat. We would watch TV and things like that, but I went to Saturday school. Sunday school was not a thing. It was always Shabbat school, and I went 3 days a week. But I would still go to the school dances on Friday nights and things but that was also just my family. But my dad was raised in a yeshiva, then raised us conservative. And then I grew up, I would say became an adult Reform in Philadelphia. And my cousin is one of the biggest Reconstructionist rabbis. So it's I've had exposure to all of this. And it's just, it depends on how much you really want to split the hairs in terms of defining what's what. And each synagogue has its own definition. So
I think how much your cousin weighs is irrelevant. But for Jason, yeshiva is a traditional Orthodox school where they train people to be rabbis.
I think it's each of them are a combination of each of those spectrums of, who do you believe wrote the Torah? What amount of the laws do you observe? How do you interpret it? I think that each of those sects of Judaism could have a variety of combination of those types of people, right? Because I'm a Reformed Jew, and everybody in my friend group thinks that I am extremely Jewish. Every friend gathering we have, I'm always asked, hey, do you keep kosher? But I don't keep, the only thing I can't eat at those gatherings is the plate. That's pretty much it. And I say that joke every time, and you'd think that they would remember it of how often I respond with that, and they still ask. And so my level of observance is more than their level of observances or the people that they know, and so they believe me to be super Jewish, whatever that might mean. And to me, I'm just a Reformed Jew.
Also, eating is such a ubiquitous thing that people tend to judge your level of observance only by what you put in your face.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when I was starting out as a rabbi, I was teaching sixth grade, and I'd go over the syllabus and I said, any questions? And everyone just kind of looked at this one kid and his hand goes up and I'm like, okay. And he goes, are you kosher? And I'm like, well, you can't eat me, so no. And and you know what I mean? And I dodged. I said, I'm a pescatarian, so I don't eat meat. So it's irrelevant. I dodged.
I'm honest with myself. I mean, I have celiac, which means I can't have gluten, like even a crumb of it. It's not like an LA made up thing. Like it's a genuine thing. So for me, I don't want to limit my food even more like that. And just the cost of my groceries is already substantially high. So when I teach it to my students and I'm like, no, I'm like, this is what the Torah says, but it doesn't mean you have to do it or not. I'm really trying to abolish the term like good Jew or bad Jew. I was like, you're Jewish. Like, if you eat bacon, you're still a good Jew. If you like keep halachic kosher, you're still a good Jew. You know, like I hate the, oh, well, you had a cheeseburger, so you must be a bad Jew. Like I grew up in what was called the hill section of Scranton, or where I went to Temple, I should say. And we were the only conservative shul surrounded by tons of ultra Orthodox and Orthodox shuls. So we would be walking to our cars after Shabbat services on a Friday night, and they would like goad us. You know, they would be like, oh, did you enjoy your ham? Meanwhile, we're at a conservative shul. So like thinking about other movements, they think we're almost as equal as, you know, so it's crazy the way that people kind of look at each other within the movements. Like that really bothers me as well. Like the fact that we can't just all get along and just like, why can't I go to an Orthodox Shabbat service and then go out bowling that night with a Reform or like a JCC kind of event?
It's funny you bring up the JCC. Like food is actually something that really intersects my world a lot at camp, where our policy for camp is, you got to bring meatless meals. And so like, that's our way of creating a kosher food policy that, works for everybody. We just kind of say, you know what, meatless meals, here's some good recommendations. So there's a lot of pasta.
I was gonna say grilled cheese, lots.
Yeah, a lot grilled cheese, pasta are probably the greatest hits.
Tuna salad?
I would probably not ask too many questions about it.
I went to I think it was a JCC day camp, and there was a day that was pasta, fries, and bagels, like all on the same day. It was just like carb. It was just carb dairy day. It was just ridiculous.
Wow. Melissa, you had said something, and we'd glossed it over at the beginning. And I just want to ask: you're from Scranton.
Yes.
When The Office came out, are those images from Scranton? And were you like, oh my gosh, that's around the corner from this thing?
That's from Scranton. And just fun fact, unrelated to this conversation entirely, there's like that Scranton paper building they show in the beginning. The tower is like crumbling. So what they're doing is they're having people sponsor a brick to rebuild it so they don't have to just totally destroy it. And it's making like an insane amount of money because of all the Office fans. Like,
wow,
it's absolutely ridiculous.
That's great.
So
brilliant.
Yeah, Scranton's a wild place.
So I mean, usually Michelle Malkin would tease us that we're going too deep.
Yeah, I was just going to shift to the nerd side. Absolutely. So let's break down the differences between different words used to identify those in more nerdy circles. Well, first, is there a better term for this collection of people? Because we're saying nerds, but it's nerds and geeks and dorks. And like, so Nerdaism feels like
Nerdaism.
Yeah.
I love it.
It feels not true, right? I like the cool kids table as a euphemism, but I don't know if you guys have heard a better term for a collection of these types or descriptors.
It's just like everyone who's not popular, which is actually the majority. So like,
so there's a comedian
who
does these, I forget his name, but he does these diagrams, Venn diagrams. And
Don McMillan.
So he talks about intelligence, social ineptitude, and obsession.
Yeah.
And if you have all three of them, you're a nerd. If you have intelligence and you're obsessed about something, that's geek. If you're obsessed about things and have social ineptitude, that's dork. And if you're intelligent and have social ineptitude, but you're not obsessed about things, you're a dweeb. So I feel like geek and nerd might be interchangeable because I feel like I'm in the modicum of intelligence with obsession, and I do have a little bit of social abilities, a little bit. So I would say on his chart, I'm a geek, but I like to consider myself a nerd because to me, that sounds nicer.
Yeah, as I was looking at this chart too, I think growing up, I definitely fell in the nerd category. Melissa, no comments, please. But I definitely think as I got older, I did gain enough social skills that probably in the same category, RDY.
Well, I will say you're using a different chart. I enjoy Don McMillan's stuff a lot. I wish he was. I looked into him when I found us up to see if he would come on the podcast. And his chart actually has a different spot in the diagram where it talks about, I want to say, socially awkward and obsessed, then you're a stalker. That was the last section.
That's
That
really
right.
funny.
That's his punch for that segment.
So, Barak, are you looking to take this into like a almost literal like high school cafeteria sort of setting?
I think that people, at least today, right? Just like a lot of people are just Jews today, right? There's a lot more of those. I think there's a lot of people who say, "Oh, I'm just a nerd." And I don't know if that definition is carrying through all the way. I don't think all of those people are intelligent, socially awkward, and obsessed, right? I don't think that's the case for everybody. I think they are just enjoying the Marvel movies, right? Or they are having a board game night, but all they're playing is Settlers. So come on. And so
But just like Judaism, you could split the hairs, right? Like I was a theater nerd, so I wasn't socially inept, but I was probably very obsessed with musicals. But like that's it, so that's where it depends on. That's even more the social cafeteria where are we all sitting.
Yeah, I was thinking of the band kids, maybe not necessarily obsessed, but like very intelligent. And did I say obsessed?
Yeah, I mean, the obsession in that case is the music or the instrument or the band or whatever. But I think there's a level of social ineptitude in that grouping as well.
Yeah, I mean, I had friends in high school who were in band, who were different types of nerds, different types of like geek, but like we definitely were allies in each other.
Right.
You need that clip of the Mean Girls movie where they talk about where everyone sits.
Yes. Don't they do that in Heathers also? I was trying to remember.
I think so, but maybe not as explicit as they do it in like Mean Girls. It's very direct, but
yeah.
Right. So we agree that similar to Judaism, it's not a spectrum of nerd to dork to like nerd to geek to dork to dweeb sort of thing, right?
It's a mashup.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked the way you framed it, RDY and Barak. It's not so much about a spectrum as much as like how much of this trait, almost like a D&D character sheet of like what are your attributes that go into building your nerddom.
I like that. Yeah. I also I'm getting, I don't know if this is just the political climate of the Americas right now, but I'm getting more and more frustrated with social divisions.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And I'm realizing that they do not serve a positive purpose. And if you want to identify as Jewish, I accept you as Jewish until you show me a reason I shouldn't. But, if you're like, I'm Jewish and have you ever met Jesus? He's awesome. Then I'd be like, hey, let's talk. Maybe you're at the wrong church.
So I'm so glad you brought it up because I was going to say in this metaphor, we're all like the different branches or sects of Judaism are different people at the tables in the cafeteria. The Jews for Jesus are the undercover cops that everyone knows is a cop.
Jews for Jesus are like vegetarians for meat.
Yes.
Or it's like the what's that movie, Never Been Kissed, where like Drew Barrymore goes back to high school and she's like very obviously 37. Like
Steve Buscemi.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey there, listeners. Your favorite Torah Smash trio is interrupting this episode to share some exciting news.
That's right. Our podcast just celebrated our 2-year anniversary, but this adventure isn't over yet.
We're on a quest to ensure Torah Smash can continue to cast its charm spell on you for the next 5 years.
With your support, we can continue to share our epic tales, nerdy rants, and even more questionable puns.
But friends, even podcasts with dozens and dozens of listeners need a little boost from time to time. That's where you come in.
We're not asking for gold pieces or magic artifacts, although we won't say no if you have any lying around. We're simply asking for your support. Go to torasmash.com/donate to help keep the fun going.
So if you've enjoyed listening to us while you sort your Legos, organize your comics, or prepare for your next dungeon crawl, consider supporting the podcast during this epic summer fundraiser by going to torasmash.com/donate.
We've set up fundraising milestones, but anything that you can give to help keep the lights on in our virtual studio is greatly appreciated.
Plus, if we reach our top fundraising goal, we'll be able to host some live shows, and you can see for yourself that I'm not a Muppet.
RDY, I finally got the chance to meet you in person, and I gotta be honest, I'm still not convinced.
And back to the ad spot. Listeners, go to torasmash.com/donate. And if you're unable to support us financially, leaving a 5-star review wherever you listen helps us just as much on Torah Smash's 5-year quest.
Torah Smash!
Assemble! Are there any other branches of Nerdaism that we've missed?
I think hardcore video gamers are kind of their own branch.
But they're obsessed with a niche. They are still obsessed.
Right.
Like we said theater geek and we said band geek. I think that qualifies in that segment. Right?
Maybe it's like a subdivision of orthodoxy where like it sure fits under that same category, but I feel like they're their own breed of like extreme social ineptitude.
Or like the
video
streamers
games,
now.
like the gamer nerds.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean the like hunched over ass crack showing 8 hours D&D
In this, or 8 hours in the same chair in their
Yes.
mom's basement.
Yes.
Yeah. Ordering
Like
pizza.
they walk out of the computer lab and you need to like spray the place down.
I also want to
is
be
that-
clear that if
Go
we're
ahead.
describing you and you're one of our dozens of listeners, we are so happy you are here and we respect you and your choices.
And also use deodorant.
Well, so where does that comparison fall in Judaism? If we say, theater nerd, band nerd, video game nerd, is that American Jew and European Jew or Ashkenazi or Sephardic?
so glad
That's we didn't even talk about Ashkenazi versus Sephardi. Like that's
what-
a whole separate.
But that's even that's a
Yeah.
separate descriptor of the different branches of Judaism. And so where do these segmentations of nerdyism come in of band, theater, video game, D&D? Like all of those are sub descriptors. How does that parallel in the Judaism world?
I
Does
think
it
the
have
Orthodox.
to do?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Melissa. You're the guest.
I was gonna say I think the Orthodox would be the one that Ethan just described. It's like the obsessive poring over the rule book, poring over the, maybe I don't know necessarily loopholes. Maybe the loophole part's the conservative movement,
Oh,
but they're
fascinating.
poring over how to just that's their whole life, right? They don't go to school, they didn't go to college, they're just streaming on YouTube and somehow making money that way and ordering pizza. That's, at least in my mind, the Orthodox Jew, like the ultra
cut off
Orthodox.
from the world, like don't
Yeah.
let others in, even though we're supposed to have windows. I don't know why I'm pointing at my window on an audio medium. Even though we're supposed to have windows in our sanctuaries, they still are isolated.
I wonder if it has to do with what we choose. And I'm approaching this from a very reform-centric mindset, because there are Reform Jews who are the high holiday Jews. There are the Reform Jews who go to Shabbat services every Friday, and they're the Reform Jews who choose to go to Torah study. Like, they're all Reform Jews, but they are choosing what does their engagement look like.
I would also suggest that there are Reconstructionists and conservative Jews who also fall under all of
Yep,
those
I was
things.
just gonna say that. Yeah, my family was high holidays only conservative though. Like after my bat mitzvah. So
What does that compare? Is that like saying that my wife enjoys the Marvel movies and she'll come with me to the theater for anything Paul Rudd's in, right? So is she a Paul Rudd Marvel nerd? Like, where is that of like, instead of a holiday Reform Jew, right? A Paul Rudd.
Ant-Man.
Yeah.
Ant-Man only.
Or even the MCU only. Like I love
No, not-
superheroes in the MCU.
She'll go for Paul Rudd is what I'm saying. And so like,
Oh,
not all of the Marvel movies, not all of the
So, like,
services.
Your wife and I would be friends.
I think you can take any subdivision and divide it further. Melissa at the
Yeah.
very beginning talked about splitting hairs. Like you can always
Yeah.
split the hairs. Like people who are obsessed with D&D. Are you a rules lawyer? Are you a murder hobo? Are you the one who likes to find cat rocks? Like what kind of D&D player are
That's
you?
Ethan's character.
Definitely has groups.
Yes, actually, that was. How did you know?
0% surprised.
Oh, you've got to go back and listen
I-
to our anniversary specials where we
Yeah.
played Jewish Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh my
One of the
God.
worst/best things I ever did. It was the start of a Starfinder campaign, so D&D in space with my best friend. And they're talking like, oh, we're in a bar. I was like, what's on TV? And you saw her like pause and go, well, it's a sports game. I'm like, oh, what game is it? They're like, it's Bitcoin. I'm like, oh, what's the score? 2-1. Oh my God, that's so high scoring. How did that happen? And just built it. Sorry, this isn't relevant.
One does not engage with Ethan Lane Miller when DMing Ethan Lane Miller.
That's how you get cat rocks.
I think you can, at least in my mind, maybe it's not necessarily a religious or non-religious spectrum. I think to me it's an potentially inclusion versus isolation spectrum in terms of observance. Because if you think about like egalitarian versus non-egalitarian, right? So I think in our metaphor, right, like which nerds also hang out with girls or which group of nerds are just girls or just boys, right? Like in my mind,
I feel
that's
both
how you can
seen
kind
and
of-
attacked, Melissa.
But if you think about it, like when you picture the person that Ethan just described, you, at least in my mind, you picture a guy. Like I don't see a female sitting in the computer lab for 8 hours, you know, ordering pizza, at least by that like stereotypical. I know that exists. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, or I'm just saying
I think maybe you're just limited in your experience.
maybe that's very true. And I know there's like all the Twitch streamers are out there. They like all live in my building in LA and they're all women. But my point is more so of like orthodoxy, you know, the hype you could say is that women don't need to observe most of these commandments because they're closer to God because they can have babies. And in my mind, I'm like, that seems like a cover. So women can be almost treated inferior. And I think in a lot of the nerd
Take out
culture,
almost.
it is. Okay. I just didn't want to, you know, put down the Orthodox, but here we are. So
I don't think they listen.
yeah, that's possible.
Oh,
so I
hey,
think,
if you are an Orthodox listener, we love you and we thank you for being
This
here.
whole section's getting cut.
RDY's opinion is not representative of that of Torah Smash LLC.
Send your mail to RDY, courtesy of.
Don't at me.
but I
So
think at least
okay.
in my mind, that's maybe where things can, like, what groups include other people, like the band Geeks, the theater nerds, the D&D people. You can't really play D&D alone. Like where are you included in community versus Ethan's looking like he's played D&D alone before, but
Yeah,
No, we're
Baldur's
just
Gate.
going to comment to each other.
You play Baldur's
Okay.
Gate alone. That's a D&D.
I don't know what that is.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Okay.
I have two.
You are not a D&D nerd.
See, this is the divisions,
Yeah.
including my comment about Orthodox, including
Yeah.
comments about the guy in the basement. These are the divisions that like can be problematic.
Well, I
Like,
think, yeah, I agree that there's parts where you end up outing or not outing, but excluding people by creating those divisions. But I will say, like, for both Judaism and the Cool Kids tables, by acknowledging and understanding that those groups of people exist, you can also help to better serve them and make them feel more welcomed when they are in your spaces. And so while there is that division, you had said, I don't think there's any value in it. I do think there's value in it. I think that knowing who an individual is can help you both relate to them better and help them to feel more like they belong to the space that they're in. Because if you just say that they are this, you know, human, that everybody's human, we should all just treat each other as human, I think you're doing a disservice to those that celebrate their individuality.
I think
I was
there's
going
a
to say,
difference-
oh, sorry.
Please, you're the
Zoom is
guest,
so
please.
hard. We still haven't figured it out. I was going to say, when I was graduating college and I knew I wanted to do something Jewish with the next step of my life, and I just didn't know what it was. My two cousins are rabbis, the one I mentioned before. So one is Reconstructionist, one is Reform. They're married to each other. They've since retired, but they had their own like Kahila group in the Philadelphia area. And they said, look, come to our services every Friday and Saturday. If this is not where you want to be, maybe you don't want to be a rabbi, you know, like, because I couldn't figure out like where I wanted to go. And on my way to one of their services, they were like, can you give a sermon on millennials and Judaism? You know, this was 10 years ago when we were considered the young people. I was like, oh my God, and like pulled over and like wrote a whole thing. And I basically came to the consensus that there has to be like a Jewish version of Netflix is kind of what I compared to. We should pay one monthly fee to Judaism and we should all be able to participate in everyone's everything. And I think that's how everyone gets exposed to each other a little bit more. And maybe it's not as daunting, right? Like I might be the first person, an Orthodox person would ever see with their shoulders out. You know what I mean? Like that, I don't know what that would do to them or vice versa. Like I've never really encountered a Haredi person. I lived in Jerusalem and I would like see them from afar, but I never obviously stopped and had a conversation with a Haredi Jew. But I know that's very complicated, but I'm trying to think of how is it less dividing. And maybe that's where, I feel like back to the nerdyism, like I was a theater geek, but I was friends with the band Geeks. I was friends with the gamer kids, like we weren't like segregated. We all kind of acknowledged the fact that we weren't the popular cheerleaders.
I mean, look,
so
you and I
I don't
became
know.
friends in New Jersey. Like, there you go.
I want to get
I
that
forced you to be my friend.
I want to get that subscription service just for the pop of like, hey, are you still doing mitzvahs?
Exactly. Mitzvahflix, something
Yeah.
like that.
I think that once we move ourselves into a Star Trek style post money world, that will be much easier.
I don't disagree. My whole thesis in grad school was how I think the conservative movement is going to die out based on their grayness. And it was a whole class on like young people in Judaism. So I used the different youth groups and their models of how their numbers are shrinking in USY, which is like what I grew up in. And I loved USY, and I think it made me who I am. And funny, you guys had Emily Simkin on, and she and I did USY together. Like I think it made me part of this like very small Jewish world, but it's dying. Like it's just that's just kind of the nature of the beast. Like probably, again, if you try to compare it to our like modern nerdyism, like the record listeners versus the Spotify listener, right? Like, do we adapt or do we let things fade out on their own? And more conservative Jews are becoming either Orthodox or Reform. Like neither, they're not staying conservative. It's very interesting.
Most Jews are becoming the nuns, Nones. None of
that's true
the
too.
above.
Yeah.
Right, because temples, like that's a whole other conversation. Like the barrier of entry is really high. Synagogue membership's expensive. People don't want to join, so it's really tricky.
I want to pull us back to the conversation before we get too far out, and we don't have too much time left. Let me ask you before we wrap up. What sect of Judaism and what sect of nerdyism would you identify yourselves as? Based on our conversation, I think I would say I am a Reform nerd Jew. I don't know how the structure goes.
I'm trying to remember which was the one that wasn't socially inept, because I think that's the one I fall into.
Geek.
Okay. I think I'm a reformcanist geek, if that makes sense.
I am a proud flag waver of the Reform movement. I grew up at the mothership in the Holy City, and I am very proud of being a Reform Jew. I am probably in my personal practice a reconformative.
What about your sect of nerdyism?
Dungeons and Marvel and Weird Al and Fish.
Okay.
Fish is a separate thing, I feel. We didn't even touch on that.
Is that just obsessed? Like it's not socially awkward or intelligent, it's just obsessed.
I think being a Fish fan is a type of nerdiness because it is an intelligent and obsession, but there is a lack of social ineptitude because like to really be a Fish fan, you don't enjoy it on your own, you enjoy it with others. And yes, you enjoy it on your own also, but the real fandom comes in live performances and being with all of these other smelly people who love what you love.
So Fish fans are nerds.
I think so.
Not food.
I am Reform through and through. Every time I learn about Reconstructionist Judaism, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But I'm definitely Reform. I'm using the chart RDY brought up. I have definitely gained social skills as I have aged. So I would say I'm somewhere between geek and nerd, but I am 1000% absolutely obsessed when it comes to like, listen, I like Star Wars a lot. I am obsessed with Star Trek. Like I can give you production details, behind the scenes things in a way that I cannot with Star Wars. Like I'm absolutely obsessed. And of course I enjoy the Marvel movies, but I haven't read the comics, but I've enjoyed the movies and the TV shows. I've watched Battlestar Galactica, Firefly. Like I'm somewhere between geek and nerd, I think for sure.
So you're an Orthodox Star Trek nerd, a conservative Star Wars nerd, and a Reform comic book nerd.
Perhaps. I mean, calling me an Orthodox Star Trek fan is actually
He's
a
mad.
very loaded statement right now because you've got people who are like, oh, any Star Trek after 2017 isn't real Star Trek, which I think is stupid. Like,
which is a very Orthodox thing to say.
Well, so exactly. So like, I don't know
if
that
you're
I
one of our
self-identify as an
fans,
Orthodox
if you're
Star
one of our
Trek
fans and you think post 2017 Star Trek is bad, we still love you. Ethan's.
I don't. You're wrong.
I think maybe those are the Haredi.
Oh,
Oh, wow. You know what made me think? You had said before, like to the board game stuff, I've been diving deep. I love playing with different board games. I love the rules. I would put myself probably on the conservative stream of board game stuff. When I play with a reform or reconstructionist board gamer who just want to do Pictionary or just settlers, or they'll pull out a conservative level board game and say, hey, by the way, we don't do pages 3 through 7 of these rules. I think they're too complicated. So we have this home rule which lets you just do whatever you want. And I'm gonna why I don't want to play with you. But I I don't know if that's
But RDY
okay.
just said we all have to play it. We all have to play together. We don't want more division. We need to.
One of
Yeah.
the literal worst things I ever did to Kaya was I invited her to a board game night and didn't tell her that we were playing the Battlestar Galactica board game that takes an hour just to explain all the rules, and we have home rules. By the end of it, she was so angry at me. But she played. But
That's
she
funny.
played.
That's so funny.
I, for the record, for this year in Austin, I will not get angry if I get invited to one of those.
Okay, good.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Okay, because we oftentimes need another player.
It's leaving me. I had a thought that I was very proud of, and then I let it go. If you love something, set it free.
Anybody else have
It's
anything?
interesting though, the points on our division's good in
Yeah.
all of this. I don't know.
I remember.
Oh, you didn't love it too that much.
It came back, so it's mine.
Oh, okay.
So Ethan brought up homebrewed D&D, and I think there's a little bit of a difference between homebrewing and skipping pages 3 through 7 of the rule book.
Probably
but-
modern Orthodox D&D gamer.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But homebrewing,
Open Orthodox. That's what it'd be. Open Orthodox D&D gaming. That's what that would be.
I think homebrewing is more in the world of like professional Jews, like Barak and Ethan and Melissa and I are, that, we're so steeped in the world that we're able to nuance and build new things for our communities because we are that educated and familiar with it. And we kind of like breathe and live Judaism to the point where we can homebrew our own communities. And there are people, myself included, who will look down their noses at homebrewed Jewish communities because it takes jobs away from trained Jewish professionals. And that's also said, having experienced some, but not all, and knowing how wonderful some can be. So again, like I'm showing my own biases and proving why I am right that we need to stop with all these divisions.
All right. Well,
But to play devil's advocate, like I started my own company, like no one employed me. So like I homebrewed a job for myself
Correct.
where there's a market that needs it. So that's where I totally understand where you're coming from. And I'm just, playing devil's advocate, but that's very Kaplan is the Kahila outlook, is the let's build a community regardless of the building we're under, which is, I think Judaism is all about community, and it's not the nerd alone, geek, whatever, dweeb, dork that's alone in their room playing D&D and not talking to anyone, or not even D&D, whatever they're playing, like Mortal Kombat for 8 hours and not interacting with any other human. Like
StarCraft.
Yeah,
Judaism is all about community. And I think that's ultimately what ties all of the branches together.
Yeah. All the branches are very tightly wound together, including the homebrewed branches, and should be acknowledged as tightly wound together, as well as the ones we didn't hit, that we gave quick word to the Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, and et cetera, et cetera. Probably American should be its own division in that sense. And I admit that I should be more open to the Jewish communities that don't identify with any of the labels we put on them. And that maybe if we would just let it all just kind of happen, that we could combat the rise of the nuns, the NONES nuns, that as long as people are connecting to a community. Ethan and I were talking yesterday about how he has found community at Shalom Austin. While it's not a synagogue, that's a Jewish community, and it's wonderful.
All right, before RDY loses any more of our listeners, I'm going to wrap us up. So while this has been an interesting conversation, I think it's a good question of whether we need to isolate and identify so much. Yes, it is important to educate yourselves and understand the differences between belief and not stereotype just because someone is Jewish or someone is sitting at the cool kids table. But we're all unique people anyway. So while you're acknowledging the differences, we need to also take time to celebrate what brings us together. That could be matzah or math, Shabbat or superheroes, or being Ashkenazi or being an introvert. Whatever our differences or similarities, I think we can all agree that everyone deserves a seat at the cool kids table.
Amen.
Yeah.
Melissa, it was great having you with us today.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank
you for joining. Is there anything you'd like to shout out in perpetuity?
My website. And if anyone wants any sort of Jewish education, if you don't belong to a synagogue and you want to just start somewhere, feel free to find me. My website is m-3.life. The number 3, not spelled out. m-3, the number, .life.
Great. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Torah Smash. Our fiscal sponsor is Jewish Creativity International. Our theme music was created by Sean Fogel. You can check out Sean's bands and studio work at www.thesleepywest.com. After 2 incredible years of smashing Torah, we launched an epic summer fundraising campaign, and we want you to join us on this journey. Go to torahsmash.com/donate to help us reach our goals in Torah Smash's 5-year quest. Our boldly goal is to continue to talk about Judaism and nerd culture for at least 5 more years. So gather your dice, assemble the team, and let the adventure commence. Go to torahsmash.com/donate today and become a hero of Torah Smash's 5-year quest. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find us and is an excellent way to support the podcast. We want to hear from you and continue today's nerdy discussion. Go to torahsmash.com to find where to connect with us online, purchase swag from our store, support us with a donation, find previous episodes, and more. And an Orthodox, a conservative, and a Reformed Jew walk into a comic book shop. The owner asks, "Are you nerds, geeks, or dorks?" And they reply, "Yes." I feel like we haven't recorded in a long time.
Because we haven't.
Yeah, we had a lot in the can.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's been 2 months since we recorded. I didn't realize that.
Is that why I miss you too?
Oh.
An Orthodox, a conservative, and a Reformed Jew walk into a comic book shop.
Ow. Why do we always come here?